Greetings. Welcome to the show, my friends. It's Armor of Truth Live number 314, sort of an emergency show. And that's why, right there. IHR amendments have been adopted. And the others, we kind of expected this to happen at some point. But the other story here that's just as big, in my opinion, is how badly the alternative media has failed you, has failed millions of us. For example, here's one of let's see, there we go. There's one of these that I'm speaking about here. Dr. Steve Turley. Just, all due respect to Dr. Steve Turley, I don't know that much about him because we've just come across his work here in the past couple days. And sadly enough, there are so many things that they're saying that are flat out wrong. They've misled all of you ever since this started. Okay, let's get into what we're talking about here. Let me explain to you what's happening. Summer, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here.
All right, is this a big deal?
It is.
It's a big deal, I think.
Yes.
It is a big deal. All right, let's just dive right in because we want this to be short and sweet because we want people like Dr. Steve Turley, like Dr. Merrill Nass, and anyone else who we stand on the same side of this battle with. But we've got to do better than this. Now, what am I talking about? Let's start off with this. We look at James Roguski's Substack, and let's just call it like it is, Summer. James Roguski has been right from the start.
He has.
He never veered out of his lane. He's been on this topic, and you can't get him to talk about a CBDC. You can't get him to talk about surveillance. He talks about the documents. He reads the documents, and he
stays in his lane.
He's good at this, right? So
yeah,
the IHR amendments have been adopted. Now, unfortunately, this is an enormous loss for all of us, and it is a huge victory for the WHO, for the international organizations, for those who call themselves the globalists. And once again, we want to reiterate and overemphasize the point that the WHO and these international organizations are not the threat to your sovereignty. You are the threat to your sovereignty. You and your neighbors and all of us together, we're the ones. We'll expand on that in a minute. Anyway, the news is this. The recently adopted amendments will facilitate, recently as in today. And it's funny because even today, if you look around on Twitter and you look around the alternative media, they're all crowing about how we won. We won. Let's see here. For example, here's some. It's being reported, this is from Peter Sweden. Now, this is somebody who's, look at this, there are 9,000 likes, 1.7 thousand retweets or re-X's, whatever this is now. It's being reported today, he put this out, that both the WHO pandemic treaty and the IHR amendments are set to fail. This is a massive victory for freedom. Meanwhile, they adopted the IHR amendments today. While what's it called again? Some of the citizens convoy.
Yeah, the road to Geneva citizens convoy.
Yeah, let's grab that right.
And we've
quick.
seen that convoy all over the world, right? So it doesn't feel orchestrated at all.
Yeah.
Not.
Yeah. And we just want to, and we're gonna, there's reason to be skeptical because these movements are so easy to co-opt. But we're gonna give the benefit of the doubt on all this. That the main organizers had the best of intentions, but we know full well that no revolution is ever. What does James Lindsay say? No revolution is ever bottom up. They're
That's always
right. Top down.
Mm.
All right, and so this is the group. Now look again. We don't want people to think that we're like calling out this movement. We're not. Lots of these people are people that we are co-belligerents with. There's James Lindsay himself as part of the Road to Geneva movement, and we would support.
Yeah, I mean, if they wanted us to come out and be a part of it, we would for the opportunity to actually reach people with the real message. So there's real people in it, but unfortunately, the people that are spearheading the whole event, now that's questionable, clearly.
Yeah, be happy to do it. But, these are the kind of things that we would probably be invited to once, because the message that we have doesn't really resonate with their message, because their message is that we have the power. It's all inside of us, the power. We'll get back to this in a minute. And I want to play for you Dr. Steve Turley's comments. This is from 3 days ago, claiming victory. The pandemic treaty, the amendments, it's all dead. It's all fizzled out. Look at this article here from...
it's like hopium. It's like false hope. And it's also misinformation.
It is. Yeah. So here's from American Greatness, WHO pandemic treaty fizzles amid disagreements between member states. There. The reporting here is... And it's true. As of last Friday, they failed to get it done in time for the WHA. But they didn't stop. And as of today, on the last day of the World Health Assembly, the 77th World Health Assembly, all for health and health for all, I think was the mantra of this one. Mm-hmm. They adopted the IHR amendments right there. Okay, let's get into this now. Now, as for the let's see. As for the pandemic, the draft agreement, the draft pandemic agreement, the draft pandemic accord, the framework convention, all that. As for that, they're going to start negotiating that again sometime in July. All right, that didn't get ratified at the WHA today, but the IHR did. So these negotiations on the pandemic agreement, what people are calling the treaty, sometime in July. Hasn't been determined yet. I'll quote James Roguski here. Let me get a better. There we go. For those who believe that the adoption of these amendments is somehow a victory, that they've been pared down and now they don't have any, they're not as severe as they once were, and they're saying this is a victory, that somehow the amendments aren't they're not that bad. They could have been worse, right? Or we dodged a bullet or something like that. As James Roguski says, please realize that over the past year, a lot of misinformation has been spread regarding these amendments. And the reason for that is this. Before I get to Dr. Steve Turley, let me play you this from James Roguski. Listen to what James says here, and heed it.
Now, a question I have there is this all, I mean, what you were saying about them, they've thrown a curveball, haven't they? They've got everybody to watch the birdie, and at the same time, they're about to punch us in the face. So is this all part of their technique of being able to get through things like this? They have to do it through trickery.
I think it's been a self-induced confusion, okay? Many people have not read the documents.
I love that. It's a self-induced confusion. We are confusing ourselves because nobody really wants to take the time to actually read what these documents say. Let's continue.
They have followed what other people have said about the documents. Now, if you read, going back a year and a half, there were things that were initially proposed by many of the nations. You're dealing with 196 nations with the amendments and 194 with the new agreement. And so what has happened is, as the negotiations have moved forward, and very, very especially that final report from the review committee back on February 6th of 2023, what has been said for the last year by many of the people in the alternative media world has not followed along with the changes in the negotiations. The current latest version of the document for the treaty is only about 30 or 32 pages, depending upon which version you're looking at. And it says very clearly in Article 24, paragraph 2, that this treaty is not an attack on sovereignty. It is not giving the WHO any authority with mandates and lockdowns and forced jabs or anything like that. What is going on here is this is a very corrupt business deal.
And that's what James Roguski's been saying from the start. Okay, this is not about someone signing away your sovereignty. If your sovereignty is to be lost, it was signed away in 1948. Your beef is not with the WHO. Your beef is with your federal government. And your action is not to cry and whine about the WHO. Your action is to be involved in your local government. Know what they're doing, because whatever the WHO does, whatever they pass or don't pass, these things will be implemented. They will be worked into the system, or they'll become law at the local level. No one will ever know it came from the WHO to begin with. Now, let's see. James says, the buildup of the pharmaceutical hospital emergency industrial complex. Let me get my headline back up here. That these amendments seek to implement in support of the equitable distribution of, quote, relevant medical products is certainly not a victory that should be celebrated. Stop allowing yourselves to be deceived. Stop deceiving yourself. And I think with that, let's jump into what it sounds like when we deceive ourselves. Let's remind you, too, we've done a 10,000-word article on this, and there's more we could say. And we're going to put out some follow-up articles on this, too, called Hidden Tyranny, the WHO is not the greatest threat to American sovereignty. And we encourage you to read through it. And look, if we got something wrong or you want to challenge us on something, please do it. Please. We don't want to continue in error. So if we're in error, let us know. We're happy to be corrected. All right, let me jump in here to this now. Dr. Steve Turley. Now, there seems to be a vein, a facet, a thread of the so-called truth movement, or what is now, become this right-wing conservative. I mean, that's where we are, right? We're considered right-wing conservative, but it's loosely affiliated sort of with the QAnon thing, and I don't like to say that, because that's what the progressives do when they want to sling mud at someone. They associate them with QAnon. I just want to be clear. I don't know if Steve Turley is associated with any of that or not. But the things he's saying here are, well, you can listen for yourself. You can decide.
Officials at the World Health Organization have egg all over their faces as their planned pandemic treaty has officially collapsed. We're to see the latest on the imploding worldwide treaty and precisely why the days of the WHO look like they are finally coming to an end. Hey gang, it's me, Dr. Steve, your Patriot Professor, here to help you.
So the Patriot Professor, let me just give you an idea of who Dr. Steve is. He's on their website, one of America's fastest growing alternative media outlets, providing an optimistic and scholarly perspective on current events and cultural trends, proudly leading over 1 million YouTube subscribers, right now 1.2, and 15 million podcast listeners. Dr. Steve Turley, the Patriot Professor, daily showcases his expertise in the rise of nationalism, populism, and traditionalism throughout the world. Now, he's also known in 2021 and 2022 for appearing alongside President Donald J. Trump and several key conservative influencers across the country at the American Freedom Tour. Let's start off right here at the 3-minute mark with the first claim about sovereignty. Now, you know what has already happened, and you heard the first claims. It's fizzled, it's failed, it's collapsed. So the first claim is false.
Recommendations in their international public health response. So obviously here the concern is that member nations that signed this treaty, will end up more or less surrendering their national sovereignty.
First off, not a treaty. Not a treaty. It's a non-binding agreement. Those are different things. Again, if you want to know the details of all this, read the article or listen to last night's show, Armor of Truth Live number 313, where we go into depth on what this agreement is and what it is not. When you call it a treaty, you're misleading your audience to think that it's something that it's not.
And how best to respond to a pandemic. If, God forbid, another pandemic happened, it would now be the...
I think we can question whether or not one happened in the first place. Am I right, son? Mm-hmm. Did one really happen to begin with? All right, anyway.
Elected bureaucrats over the WHO who would decide the rules and the protocols for dealing with the pandemic. Moreover, the treaty includes things like the right of the WHO to not only mandate vaccines and vaccine procedures, but also who can access all kinds of alternative.
Now, that doesn't give them any right to mandate any such thing. Again, we'll tell you, yes, they can recommend, and they can, and they will have now this IHR. What this IHR does do, if you look, now we're not going to go into the details of the IHR tonight because this needs to be a short video. We did that last night, and there's a link in the description of this video to where James Roguski shows you what's most relevant in these new IHR regulations that have been adopted today. It doesn't do what he said. Again, let's make it clear right off the top. It's about enforcement. The WHO can say whatever they want to. They can mandate whatever they want to. But it's your government that will enforce it. Specifically, it would be the Department of Health and Human Services, Javier Becerra, who's, so it's political. If it happens to be someone who's aligned with Biden or Obama Biden, that whole several-headed monster there, then they would certainly go along with it, it seems like, right? If it happened to be Trump, and obviously it would be more difficult. So, again, this is how this is working. I'm getting off on a tangent here. So this is really not about sovereignty. It's not about the WHO mandating anything. If they recommend it, your government will either ignore it or enforce it.
Antiviral drugs, as well as even mandate what can be publicly said, the information that can be allowed to be disseminated regarding the vaccines and the drugs. So this is where particularly Bill Gates' contribution in all of this comes in. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is one of the most powerful and largest organizations.
Okay, now that's, we don't disagree with that point so much. But let's go right here to this point where, again, the claim that it has all collapsed. Again, folks, the alternative media has failed you. I'm not calling anybody a liar, but on the very day that the IHR amendments were adopted, you've got people out here saying that it has collapsed. Let's listen to this.
It is Saturday, 1st of June, and now 20 minutes past 10 here in Geneva. And as we speak, the 77th World Health Assembly is still going on. And we still not have a final conclusion about the amendments to the international health regulations. And the latest information I received is that both legal instruments will be postponed for a later vote later this year.
False. Absolutely wrong information. Now, let's give him the benefit of the doubt. This could have been before. He said it was still going on. However, you can't come out and say that. You can't come out and make that. Now, this is this gentleman, Peter Cruz. I believe he's at one of the leaders, one of the organizers of the Citizens Convoy, the Road to Geneva. So there's that. Now let's jump back over here to Son. Please feel free to jump in if you see something you want to say, because I'm kind of on a
keep the rant going.
Yeah. All right. So let's back here. Minute 4:30.
Medical and media responses to another global pandemic. Well, I am ecstatic to report that the WHO's pandemic treaty has officially collapsed. And the word
officially collapsed. The alternative media, my friends, has failed you. They have sold you out. They have took you for a sucker. Summer, what did you say earlier today about what they've done with the truth?
They are sacrificing the truth to be relevant, for one.
Relevance, absolutely. Well said. That is perfectly said.
And, we were talking about the different reasons, to be fair, wanting to be fair and gracious toward these people, like maybe they are under like a lot of financial pressure. And so they want to rush information out. Yeah. And, before they've looked into it to get likes and views. And, we're in a depressed economy right now. And so people might do some desperate things. And so, but still, that's very irresponsible. At the end of the day, how do you sleep at night if you're going to do that? So that, anyway, but there's also the Machiavellian, the ends justify the means. Yes. Like if you're dumb enough to watch my news, to watch my reports and believe it and take it on board and not look into the research yourself, then I don't care. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of people do think that way. Yeah, we're not making any claims about Turley because, quite honestly, 2 or 3 videos is what we've seen, but these claims are pretty straightforward. Yeah, and let us be clear, we make mistakes here. Yeah, of course.
We get things wrong. okay? Sometimes we speak too quickly. I know that happens. That's not what this is about. This information is easy to find. This is well known. This is on the day of, right? They're making these claims. So go ahead.
Well, the video that you're playing right there, right? Isn't that from 3 days ago, or is that more recent?
Yeah, this was from it's from back on Wednesday, I think it was.
Mm-hmm. Right, so, but it was like too soon to be calling the shots on that.
Well, whenever like it was, the claim that it has collapsed and it's over and we've won. That's what that's what the Russell Brand video was about.
Yeah,
he was saying
there were a lot of people out there saying that it's collapsed, we've won. They're scared, like we're going to do this convoy, and they're shaking in their boots, and that's just not true at all, guys. I mean, that's just crazy. Yeah, it's crazy talk.
It's not what's happened. Let's listen to a little bit of this from this is actually from the road to Geneva. Again, just be very clear. A lot of these people, we're on the same side of the thing, right? We don't want globalism to win. We think the WHO should be ended. America, in fact, House Resolution 79 to withdraw from the WHO and defund it. You need to let your congressman, senator, let your senator right now, that's where it is now, know about that. Information in the description for that. Listen to this. Thought this was interesting from today. This is from today at the Road to Geneva Citizens Convoy in Geneva.
We are standing here today in a moment that will undoubtedly go down in history. It is in this moment that we, the people of the world, unite together as fellow citizens, choosing to no longer be artificially divided, and instead acknowledging the power that we hold as the 8 billion people of the world. Throughout modern history, our governmental systems, which were originally designed to secure unalienable rights and founded on the principles that support humanity, have been insidiously corrupted by money and power. The same governments that were intended to work for the people have been seized by public-private partnerships and international groups of unelected global authorities who do not represent the people and instead act for self-interest and financial gain. We find ourselves in a position where the same entities that wrote the foundational documents that guide the protection of human rights are now the ones violating them.
I'm not sure what that statement actually meant, but up to then, you obviously, you agree with what's being said there, but there's a celebration here going on for something that hasn't happened. All right, let's continue with Dr. Turley now.
Words of Deborah Hine, writing for America Greatness. The treaty is, quote, crashed and burned. The announcement of its crashing and burning comes on the heels of the WHO Assembly. That's happening right now as we speak, from May 27th to June 1st, where member nations are convening to discuss ideas to improve global readiness for future pandemics. But implementing a formal WHO treaty appears to now officially be off the table. In the weeks leading up to this assembly...
You heard that, right? It's off the table.
We just showed you last night in the clips from Tedros that he's not going to give up. Like, this isn't the end. They're just going to go back and revamp it and hopefully get it on Senate floors so that they can really have it, have teeth.
That was last Friday night he said that too. And now, just, I did read what Dr. Steve Turley had written about this, and he did say, he pointed to those, he made those points in his write-up about this on his website, where they failed to get it ready in time to come to agreement in time for the WHA, but that Tedros said that they would definitely keep going, whatever. So he does know about that. But I mean, this is what I'm talking about. The alternative media has failed you. Right? They're going after being relevant rather than telling the truth. Packaging the truth. Right? They're trying. Let me just slow down here for a minute. Because the claim here was made that the WHO had backed down. Right? They have backed down from some of their claims. Nothing. They've backed down from very little. From very little, in fact. And as we said here, if you read our article, as we said, these people are not, they're not dummies. They know how to make you feel like you've won a battle when you've walked right over the cliff. Right? These are some of the most intelligent social engineers the world's ever seen. They know how to make you feel you're winning the battle when you're getting beat. Let's see. Just the fact that these negotiations have been mostly secret, the fact you're not allowed to criticize them, tells you that there's more to it than meets the eye here. All right, let's. The next one would be 7 minutes 40 seconds. Here we go.
We not only got the WHO to backtrack on a number of its more controversial measures, but our pressure ended up collapsing the whole thing in the end to boot.
Wow.
It was a magnificent example
so
of what happens when patriots all over the world band together. And that really is key here. We've talked about this a number of times on this.
What are we banding together on, right? Patriots around the world have banded together over what? Over what truth exactly? What truth? I mean, what is it? There is, listen, folks, truth is not a movement. Patriotism is not a feeling. Truth is self-evident. Patriotism is, well, that's action. That's action. This is mostly about a feeling. Let me continue here. So anyway. And the reason I'm using this as an example, this is just a very common example of what you find out on Twitter, social media, YouTube, when you hear people talking about this. There's been one clarion voice through the madness, and it's been James Roguski all along saying this. Read the documents. It's not about your sovereignty, at least not coming. The WHO's not coming to take it away. Anyway.
Channel, but it bears repeating in the wake of this treaty collapse. Several months back, the New York Times ran a piece about the other nefarious world organization, the WEF, right? The World Economic Forum, formerly headed by Klaus Schwab, who's now resigned. The Times basically admitted that the days of the WEF are indeed coming to an end. And this is simply because the world is changing, and it's changing in ways that threaten to bring to an end the very existence of the WEF itself, and I would argue with that the WHO. The WEF, like the New York Times is arguing, is losing its relevance. It's losing its influence, its power to direct and dictate political.
I would agree with that in a sense that they are exposed. They are largely exposed for what they're really about. But their influence is going nowhere. These people are. It already exists.
It's entrenched.
It is already embedded in your culture in the United States right now. We got into detail on that last night in Armor of Truth Live number 313. So check that out. All right, let's finish up here because he talks about these the legislation from the states here in just a second.
And economic life around the world. And this is largely because more and more populations are deliberately turning away from globalism and globalist structures and goals and are instead embracing nationalism, populism, and traditionalism. As many of you know, it's not just the WHO that's provoking mass protest around the world, right? The European farmers' protest continues to...
Right, this is true. There is an uprising. There is a movement. Some kind of movement at work here, a backlash.
Their livelihood and their ability to farm.
That is true.
The protests have amassed in Brussels, the seat of the EU, where numerous tractors and trucks have sealed off streets, closing off the European headquarters in order to pressure the EU's agricultural ministers to back off from these more draconian environmental regulations. And guess what? They won. They did it. A major European Union plan to impose more radical climate restrictions on these farmers has officially been dropped. Again, just like what we're seeing with the WHO. But this is precisely what the New York Times piece is getting at. The world is changing. And it's changing in ways that are leaving what are de facto world governments like the WEF and the WHO behind. There was a time when these world government organizations were able to far more effectively institute their agenda, no question. But those days are over. The demons in Davos, the warlocks of the WHO, they have yet to get the memo, but make no mistake.
That is some very clever alliteration, and I appreciate the writing flair, but it's false. It's false. I'll tell you why.
They will. Their days have come to an end, just like this worldwide pandemic treaty. Here's your opportunity to tell.
Okay, so that's the end. What he did, I think I skipped over it, was he talked about the legislation in Louisiana where they passed it unanimously. Gosh, I missed that whole point, didn't I? Well, anyway, you've already talked about it here. He said they unanimously passed in Louisiana this that in Louisiana it was State Bill 133, Senate Bill 133. And we read that here for you. Basically, it was they said that the WHO, the UN, and the WEF have no jurisdiction in our state. Well, good job. That's something, but that's not going to help you in the long run. And that's because there's something called regionalism at work. Regionalism is the intermediate step between nationalism and globalism. We'll define that for you more in just a second. Look at now. This is Peter Sweden. Peter Sweden is this is one of the heavy hitters in this so-called truth movement. You know, this uprising. Again, today announcing it's all going to fail. It's all collapsed. That's the claim. We played this clip for you here. But then there are those out there on Twitter who did get it right. And look at who they're all referencing. Here, this one says, terrible defeat. The WHO Assembly adopted the IHR amendments. Right, and this was from earlier today. Again, one after another. And look who they're all referencing. They're all saying, go read James Roguski's report. Because James Roguski is the only one who's reading the documents and following what's happening inside the chamber there.
This is a good exercise in seeing who's paying attention.
It's
kind of like shaking out the people that are there to just sort of grift on everything.
Remember October 4th, anybody?
Yeah.
Does anybody remember what happened leading up to October 4th last year when the big test, with FEMA and the FCC, and they're going to do the test of the emergency broadcast system, and all these people.
And they made some crazy claims with that.
Jason Shirko was the ringleader, right?
Yeah.
And I haven't seen much of him lately. I'm sure he's there. I've been looking for him though. And they were all warning you that watch out for these frequencies that are going to come through your phone or come from the towers. They're going to activate whatever was in the jet. Come on, man.
See this, and then I just think, a few days later, so it's like, we have controlled opposition operations that put this false information out there, so that then in a few days, or maybe the day later, they can come back and say, see, look at this terrible information that's out there. Here's how it's wrong. We fact checked it, and these people really need to be controlled, and it needs to be a crime. So that's how it works. The controlled opposition is putting false information out there. They have their list of talking points that they want everybody to take. And then some people that are knowingly on board with this, they get out there and they put the information out there, and then people just parrot, like for what we said, for different reasons. Like maybe they're desperate, or they're Machiavellian. But this is a real problem. And it's this kind of thing right here that gives people false hope. And then also it brings about a feeling of deep shame. Like people feel very ashamed of themselves because they're like, oh, yeah. And they're telling everybody. And then suddenly it comes out that that's actually the totally wrong information. And then they feel like shamed. And then they think, it trains them like, oh, well, I'm not going to speak out because, I made a fool of myself. And so more and more people just get hushed and silenced that way. So, I would offer that this is very much a psychological operation.
Yeah, we were talking about this earlier today. There is certainly controlled opposition, no doubt about it, right? These, like I said earlier, the people in the Geneva death cult have some of the best social engineers that have ever lived working for them to make you think you've won something, make you think you feel like you're winning something. But then But then other people will follow what Dr. Steve Turley is saying, and they'll go repeat it, and they might feel, hey, I want to be a YouTuber too. I want to make a living doing this. And they might really believe in the movement, and they'll just go out and say, okay, he's going to be my source for information. I'm just going to repeat what he says over here in this lane. And they do it, and then it just grows into a movement that goes nowhere. So what we want to point out to you, the reason I brought up October 4th is, remember who the people were who said these things. As Summer just said very well, this is a way to find out who's paying attention, who's actually reporting facts to you, who's actually bringing you, who actually is caring about what they're saying to you. Now, I know one of the things that Dr. Turley says on his website is that he's about bringing positive news, positive through a positive lens, right? Well, that's all well and good. But what about the truth? Your sacrifice, Summer said, this is a very profound statement. She said it earlier today. I told her to write it down because that is very important. They're sacrificing truth on the altar of relevance, right? And this is a recipe for failure. It's an obsession with relevance, to be the first one with the information, to be the first one that tells the people it's over, we won. That derails intellectual development, and it sabotages our foundational purpose. Again, a minute ago, we said regionalization is the intermediate step in globalization. It's a step-by-step transfer of rights that starts locally. It doesn't start at the WHO. It starts in your neighborhood. Alex Newman, writing for New American. Now, we've just started following Alex Newman recently.
Yeah,
right?
recently.
What can you say about him? Do you have who he works for? I mean, I can't.
Well,
remember.
I know that
the Sentinel, right?
Yes, the Liberty Sentinel.
Liberty Sentinel, that's
it. And Epoch News. He does some writing for them, and
homeschooling advocate. And
yeah.
So, and he's been doing some really good work. And he said this in one of his recent articles that Summer shared with me, and she probably shared it with you guys.
He's been researching for a long time.
Yeah, he's got the goods.
Old school.
Right for the New American, he said, the deep state's globalist plan for what insiders refer to as the New World Order, basically a global government, begins with submerging the sovereignty of nation states into regional orders. Regional governments, like with the European Union, for example, serving as the premier example. It's regionalization. This is what you need. This is the term you need to get. You need to understand this. Newman continues, saying, eventually, these regional orders will be interwoven into an overlapping patchwork of multilateral regimes on the road to creating a truly global authority, perhaps under the United Nations or some less discredited future global body. In his book, War on Peace, Global Government Promoting, Council on Foreign Relations co-founder John Foster Dulles spelled it out clearly. He said, quote, the United Nations, now I'm quoting a quote inside a quote. He said, the United Nations represents not a final stage in the development of world order, but only a primitive stage. Therefore, its primary task is to create the conditions which will make possible a more highly developed organization. Unquote Dulles. Dulles went on to argue, though, that the existing UN Charter was strong enough to serve as the foundation for a world government. In a 1962 report headlined, A World Effectively Controlled by the United Nations, financed by the U.S. State Department, Council on Foreign Relations member, longtime State Department official Lincoln Bloomfield argued, quote, ever larger units evolve through customs unions, confederation, regionalism, etc., until ultimately the larger units coalesce under a global umbrella. Does that sound familiar? Unquote on Alex Newman now. Back to me now. Okay. The WHO and the UN are working hard to implement their goals at the local level, bypassing federal legislation. That's regionalism, okay? So in the example of the World Health Organization, what do I mean by that? Well, it's the pharmaceutical industry. It's the medical industrial complex. They're already in your nation. That's one of the heads of the Hydra you need to be focused on. But the primary one you need to be focused on is your government, right? You need to be active locally, and you need to be aware of what your federal government's up to. In other words, regionalization, it's a manipulation by regional agencies, stakeholders they're called, working with the federal government and NGOs that's designed to trap locals, to entrap locals, and then to incrementally remove the sovereignty of local governments. Are you following me now? It's not the WHO that's a threat to your sovereignty. It's these non-governmental organizations that are working with your federal government. It's these stakeholders who are working with your federal government to implement these things locally. It's not coming from the WHO. It's designed to entrap you as a local citizen in your area by incrementally removing what's called, I might call it, I believe that probably a better term would be local autonomy, the ability to govern yourself locally, right? These local governments have been happily accepting grants from these NGOs and these agencies who are working with the federal government, not understanding that these grants are pushing them further and further toward a cliff. And that's because the lines between the public and private become blurred. Stakeholder agencies work by a model that gradually empties out suburban and small cities, if you're talking about Agenda 21, right, and forces people into the stack 'em and pack 'em mixed use facility style. In other words, whether it's the WHO or whether it's the United Nations or whoever, the goal is local sovereignty, local autonomy, local governing autonomy would be removed. It would slip away. And your rights would be homogenized into consensus. The way this is done is, let's say you've got half a dozen mayors and city planners, town managers, the people who are responsible for deciding the zoning in your area, or health leaders of your local health department. And they become members of these regional conferences who are started and run by these NGOs who are working with the federal government. And then they're trained how to go back to their cities and implement these policies, whether it's Agenda 21 or the World Health Organization's policies or whatever. And you can't vote that. You can't vote someone else's mayor out of office. But this is how they would have control over you locally. And the last thing they want is an informed and active public. And I'm telling you here, sadly, to report that this kind of reporting here makes us an ignorant and uninformed public. This is dangerous to us because this is not good reporting. The focus needs to be elsewhere. For example, who is it that's going to be enforcing the IHR, the International Health Regulations? Now they've been adopted. Who enforces them? As we told you last night, it is your local government. It is your federal government ultimately is responsible for that, and then it trickles down. But the policies are implemented locally.
Yeah, and one of the things that we're going to talk about that we're still fleshing out for you guys, or just putting all the information together, is the Rotary Club. So I've got that up on the screen right now. We're going to talk about this because this is one of the ways I'm sure you guys have all seen out there, the Rotary Club and, around town. We actually have an active one that comes into our facility that we have our studio in. And certainly when I was living in Asia, I was brought to Rotary meetings and saw the people that are there. So anyway, we'll get into that, but that's one example of how they come in and infiltrate on the local level for this regionalism.
Yeah, and so what she's saying there, this is a very good segue, a good point right here, because who enforces this ultimately is going to be your neighbors. It's going to be your friends, maybe your family, who are members of certain organizations or who have been homogenized. They've been swayed to believe that climate policies or these new health policies are the right way to go. So keep in mind, when we're talking about the WHO, the United States is one of the original signatories of the WHO Constitution. Signed it in 1946, and then it was ratified in 48 under President Harry Truman. So the United States was one of the original member states that signed the WHO Constitution, has been a significant contributor in financially and in terms of policy influence. It's very unlikely that the federal government is going to cut its ties with the WHO because they created it with other allied nations after World War II. But it's there. It's a foreign policy mechanism for the United States government. They don't want to lose that. The U.S. is a key player in the World Health Organization. Substantial funding, specific expertise in guiding the organization's initiatives. Where do you think they get most of their ideas, for this pandemic agreement? The HHS, CDC, other pharmaceutical industry here. Now, United States membership in the WHO aligns with its broader foreign policy objectives. Now, what about the World Health Assembly that has just adopted this IHR resolution? Well, the World Health Assembly is the governing body and decision-making body of the WHO. The U.S. mission to the United Nations is a large delegation headed by the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. It includes a team of diplomats, experts, support staff. They're all assigned to multiple committees and councils, assemblies, and specialized agencies, which is what the WHO is. And so this delegation of United States citizens to the WHO generally includes officials from federal agencies, the HHS, CDC, various public health experts, and they participate in the World Health Assembly, in the negotiating. They also participate in the WHO Executive Board, which means they play a very important role in directing and guiding the WHO. This means that the United States is directly involved in guiding and implementing WHO policies and in governing the WHO.
And I just want to say, too, we've got a slide up here now about the Mexican president calling for EU-style North American Union. So, again, this is an example of regionalism. And this was recent that he came forward and said this, and the mainstream media really suppressed this story. So we actually got this story from Alex Newman. And, this is this regionalism. So this is where they're moving us into to get more and more and more centralized along the way. So it's, again, guys, this is the Agenda 21 for the 21st century. It's a 100-year plan. They're in it for the long game.
No doubt. Okay, so just a little bit about the IHR. Okay, these international health regulations, now they are binding in name only, right? They're binding but non-binding in nature. That means that they're legally binding in the sense that member states, including the United States, are obligated to report certain data like public health events. They're obligated to collaborate in the event of international health emergencies. However, the enforcement of the international health regulations or any pandemic treaty that may come in the future relies on national governments' voluntary compliance. The WHO, the UN, they have no enforcement mechanism. Implementation. Right. The U.S. implementates international health regulations through domestic laws and regulations overseen by federal agencies, again, Health and Human Services, CDC, other perhaps local health agencies. Again, states have a lot of authority over their public health. So, again, you need to pay attention to what your state leaders believe. Do they believe that the WHO is a valid and good institution? Are they going to follow what they say? Tell them you're not going to vote for anybody who follows that. So that, again, that's your focus. Your focus shouldn't be on the WHO. It should be on your local government working your way out to your congressmen and senators. Inside the United States, the WHO recommendations, IHR, or any pandemic accord or agreement will be enforced through domestic laws under federal and state jurisdiction. All right. We're at the mercy of our government when it comes to this. That's why it's so important to be vigilant and actively engaged with your local and state government. Know who your congressman is. Know who your senators are. Know their policies. Know how they vote on issues that matter to you. Know what matters to them. Especially find out whether or not they have any work and knowledge on the United States relationship with the WHO. Don't assume that because they're politicians they already know all this stuff. The chances are they don't. And we can see that from a lot of the legislation that's come up over the past year. Louisiana, Oklahoma. You like to hear these states saying, look, we're sovereign and we don't, they don't have any jurisdiction here. Very good. Keep the WHO out of your state. But your real beef is with your federal government. On a day-to-day basis, these politicians are way more concerned with fundraising, right? They're interested in keeping their position than they are studying and understanding this information the way you and I must. The matter of enforcement of these policies that are imposed by international organizations was settled when the U.S. co-founded and signed the charter for the UN and the WHO, when they became a founding member. You might not like the sound of that. This might go against what you've been hearing from the alternative media for the last 2 years. But the truth is the truth. It doesn't matter how you feel about it. What this tells us ultimately, bringing it back home, is that the first and most present danger to American sovereignty is Americans. Primarily, the United States government. It always has been. That's why the Constitution is what it is. That's why it's so important. If and when the pandemic accord is ratified, and we've got the IHR adopted at this point, the United States will not lose its sovereignty. It could go one of two ways. As I've said, either your federal government will do nothing and allow these things to be implemented locally, or the federal government, state would enforce them itself. That is a true and clear and present danger to American sovereignty. It's our government. Now, if only that were clear to more of us. So we have to know more about non-binding agreements, and we went into great detail on that last night, so please check that out. Or our article makes it very easy. We've got it, it's written in 4 parts, so you can navigate it easily. It's 10,000 words. It's a lot. The United States and the WHO utilize non-binding resolutions and declarations. We've already seen it demonstrated, right? These international health regulations are a framework referred to as binding. Again, they're non-binding actually in nature because they have no enforcement. These agreements do not require any signatures or Senate ratifications or legislative implementation. Enforcement comes from your government and your own laws. So whether it's Agenda 21, Sustainable Development Goals, or pandemic preparedness, these rules or agreements, ostensibly, you're told, reflect what the world's people want. In reality, as we've seen with the United Nations for more than 30 years with smart growth and sustainable development, most people don't want this stuff, but you're given the impression of consensus, right? That's what social engineering is really about. So I want to finish up just a bit with regionalism, just to close up, so that we know what we're dealing with here. Okay, again, regionalism. Bear with me. I want to get my notes back up here so I don't mess this up here. Regionalism is the intermediate step in globalism between, like what we've had in America, we've had constitutional republic, nationalism. Take care of our needs first. Now, regionalism, as we've pointed out, ultimately will try to homogenize the people from the local level up. Okay, that's the big point to take away tonight. Regionalism is your term of the day. Understand it, know how it works, because it's far more dangerous to you than the WHO and their pandemic agreement. Now, again, as James Roguski has pointed out, what these things do is they sort of standardize some very bad practices in so-called medicine, more like pharmakia. That's why they're so bad. But the reason, so we want to abolish the WHO. We want it gone. It needs to be gone. It's rogue. It's corrupted. It cannot be reformed. Anybody who's saying, like the 22 attorneys general who wrote to the president, they were calling for a reform of the WHO. Lots of these senators who've written the letter, we've got to fix the WHO. They say, no, you got to end it. It can't be reformed. So regionalism is the term, right? It's the intermediate step to globalism. The framers of the Constitution created this covenant with the American people. And they're between the American people and their government. And it placed the fate of the nation, it placed the fate of the people and all their descendants in the hands of the people. They built a wall around America that tyrants could not breach if, and only if, the people were steadfast and vigilant in their personal duty to keep it. Whereas the masses had always been considered too ignorant, disparate, or disengaged to govern themselves, history had almost exclusively seen monarchies, oligarchies, theocracies, and empires. Democracies and republics had been tried before, but the United States Constitution was and still is unique. Ben Franklin's heartening but sobering words, "It's a republic if you can keep it," that declares the precarious, conditional nature of the American system of government. It's built from the local level up. It's maintained, it's protected from the local level up. The people are the ones who decide whether they will be free from tyranny. The people decide whether faithful leaders will lead the nation. And the people decide whether an international organization would overrun the country. If you can keep it as a call to action, and it's saying that maintaining a republic involves more than just enjoying the benefits. It requires commitment. Commitment to civic duty, voting, staying informed, holding your leaders accountable. Freedom requires many things from its beneficiaries, like wisdom, moral integrity, and faith. And that's just to name a few. And when we say wisdom and moral integrity, the alternative media over the last 2 years has not done that for you. They've led you along. Getting clicks, as Summer said so well, they have sacrificed the truth to be relevant. Preserving our way of life and the safety and prosperity of those who will come after us necessitates our constant watchfulness, our eager participation, especially in a time when societal norms have drifted into a dark, arbitrary sense of morality. So all that's left to ask is, are you going to remain complacent? Are you going to let the alternative media tell you what to think? Are you going to sit back and complain, waiting for the cavalry to come save the day? Or are you going to consider the lives of those who will come after us? Are you going to consider and be grateful and respond faithfully to the greatest temporal gift God has bestowed on any group of people ever? The question is, will you keep it? We've drifted away from eternal principles. Right? The true nature of liberty has been lost. We've all been seduced by this paradoxical and militant sense of individualism. You can actually hear that in the words of those standing on the stage at the people's or at the citizens' convoy, the road to Geneva. And again, I don't want to sound like I'm calling them out. I just want them to understand, if you're not founded on eternal principles, if your ultimate sense of authority stops with your heart and your own desires for what you think is right and what you think should be done, then you're just going to get more of what you got. That's what the French Revolution basically was. It was a celebration of freedom to do whatever, with no restraints. You see, and ultimately that led to the Reign of Terror, where heads rolled all over France. So we've all been seduced by this paradoxical, militant individualism, right? Where half of the nation today looks to the state for security and provision. We all know who those are. Those are the progressives that we call the liberals today. The other half, our conservative so-called movement today, is convinced that purely by their will to manifest their desire, they can be patriots and take down the tyrants. Both have forsaken divine principles of dependence and independence. Galatians 5:1 says, "For freedom Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to a yoke of slavery. The context here is the yoke of the slavery of the law, of keeping the law, of works salvation. This can be applied also to our position, our situation here today. Don't submit yourselves to another form of slavery by depending on our desire for what we want. We have to appeal to these eternal principles. 1 Samuel, no, let's don't do that. Let's go to Jeremiah. Jeremiah 17, 5 through 8. Thus says the Lord, cursed is the man who trusts in man and who makes flesh his strength, whose heart turns away from the Lord. He's like a shrub in the desert, and he shall not see any good come. He shall dwell in the parched places of the wilderness, in an uninhabited salt land. Nothing grows there. Blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord, whose trust is the Lord. He is like a tree planted by water that sends out its roots by the stream and does not fear when heat comes. Get that? He's rooted in the ultimate, absolute truth. And he has no fear when the heat comes. He has no fear of these international movements. For its leaves remain green and is not anxious in the year of drought. For it does not cease to bear fruit. Trusting in human solutions, including the state, or including ourselves to reform the nation just by our pure desire and our own will, that's akin to idolatry, and it leads to spiritual and societal barrenness. Genesis 3, Adam and Eve's blame shifting after the fall reflects humanity's tendency to avoid personal responsibility. Or, as Summer said earlier, this was a good point you brought up again today, Summer, the Machiavellianism, right? You can see Machiavellianism at work in the fall, where Eve believed that this is the result we want. We want this knowledge. We want to have all of this knowledge and power and this understanding, and we don't want to have to submit to anyone's laws. We don't want to have to submit to anyone above us. We want this power for ourselves. And we'll do whatever it takes to get there, even sin, even take a bite out of this forbidden fruit. This is a tendency that's magnified when individuals rely either on the state to resolve personal and communal issues, or when they rely on their own willpower to get it done. Matthew 25, Parable of the Talents, emphasizes the importance of personal responsibility and stewardship. So we're talking about, this movement we're talking about here today certainly is taking on this idea of personal responsibility, but their idea of stewardship is skewed. When individuals neglect biblical stewardship of the earth, of governments, and prefer this kind of intervention, where they overlook where the real threat is, well, then that does end up undermining principles of self-governance and accountability. Right? It's just another expression of the tyranny of the majority. We want to do this because we believe this is right. In other words, the ultimate principles of good and evil. We know what's good because it's in my heart. No, we have to appeal to something greater than that. A transcendent, objective, moral law. And that's the way we revitalize our nation. Not by calling ourselves patriots and getting excited about how we feel about a movement. We do that by faithfully maintaining our local governance. It's a concept in the Bible called subsidiarity. The idea that we should appeal to the governments closest to us. In other words, local government should be our first stop on our way to bringing complaints, through settling differences, through saving and restoring the nation. Start with your own backyard. Take responsibility for the welfare and governance of your own town. That's how you counterbalance the drift toward regionalism and ultimately globalism. All right, Summer. That's it. That's
a wrap. We just wanted to get out there and say that to you guys because we had that breaking news.
This is probably our most passionate topic. So we hope that you'll share this, and please, because it's hard. We have a hard time getting this message out to people because for whatever reason it is, we're just a small channel. But we believe this is the right way to think about this. So God bless you, my friends, and we'll see you again here very soon.
God bless you guys.
The hammer comes down and beats you over the head for the rest of your life with a big national security stick. And so that people learn to duck their head and not speak up because bad idea now.
This is the emergency broadcast system. This is not a test. Repeat, this is not a test. Citizens are advised to take the following steps.
Find us, armoroftruth.net.
In the age of technocracy, scientism, and pop atheism,
faith is resistance.
Nietzsche, of course, announced the death of God and called for the birth of the Übermensch, the Superman, who would take humanity to new heights and to create a new world order.
Find us at the Armor of Truth YouTube channel.
This is not a test.